Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very powerful show coming right up, and our special guest today is Laurie Cameron, and she's here to talk to us about her new book, The Mindful Day: Practical Ways to Find Focus, Calm, and Joy from Morning to Evening. Now, Laurie's book's been published through National Geographic, so you know it's a great book, and they hand-selected her to write this book specifically. She is the founder and CEO of Purpose Blue, an organization that brings evidence-based mindful leadership programs to companies, change makers, culture shifters, universities, and federal agencies. So let's welcome to the show, Laurie.
Thank you, Marianne. Great to be here.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. And gosh, soon as I heard about your book, I was like, oh, we have to talk. I just love your book.
Thank you. It was such a wonderful, joyful project. And it's very exciting that it's available now, but just about to, hit the bookstores.
Well, I'm a little bit lucky because with having a radio show, I get to have all the juicy books right before they hit the bookstore. So I know your book is released next week, and congratulations. How exciting is that?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's available on pre-order right now, right?
Yeah, it's wonderful to be backed by National Geographic, and they've just done a beautiful job of getting it out there, and it's up now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble for pre-order. So I'd love for your guests to go ahead and order it, and then join my community where we can continue the conversation about how to be mindful in the small moments of our day and the big ones.
Oh, don't we need that right now? My goodness. It seems like every time we turn on the TV, there's something that just kind of wants to throw us into the bushes, so it's so nice to develop this mindfulness practice.
Yeah, it's really a challenging time, and there's a couple of forces at play that are making mindfulness such a revolution. One is the uncertainty that we're all living in, and even the fear, with the current events that we're experiencing in the school in Florida and, the international stage and what's happening. I'm here in Washington, D.C., so just the uncertainty of our policies and all the things that are going on, as well as what's happening in our businesses and in our home. It's that instability and that uncertainty and unpredictability that makes all of us kind of run on sort of a level of low-grade anxiety or, even stress. It's stressful not to know what tomorrow might look like.
Yeah,
and that's really one of the big things that's going on now. And that, I think another big thing that has been accelerating, we've been experiencing it for a couple of years, but this, just the fact that we're in a tech-saturated world, that we've got our, phones and our laptops and our TVs and all kinds of devices, and we're plugged in, and it's really become an addiction in our society. That we love that constant hit, we love that feedback, and I think we're craving connection, and even the Facebook like or, an incoming text gives us a little sense of I'm connected, but we're missing out on real connection.
Yeah, having that personal connection, because it does feel, we're the most, I've said this on other shows too, we're the most connected and yet disconnected society, in the course of our history.
Yes, and it's getting worse, and that we're connected in ways that are really wonderful. I can find out instantly when something happens across the world, or I can stay connected to my high school friends like I never could before. But we are more isolated, so we live more. We spend way less time in nature. We're a species that's designed to be outside. We're designed to be in the air and walking on the grass and feeling the breeze and listening to animals and birds. And we're spending time indoors more and more and more. And then we're not communicating, like human being to human being, using our voices, using our eyes and our body language. we're texting and we're sending a message. So we're more and more isolated, and that creates stress.
Well, and so this, gosh, I'm always so curious, like what inspires people to follow the different paths that they follow? And so how did you get started on the mindful path?
So thank you for that question. I really started as a child. I was fortunate to grow up with some interesting parents. My mom was always a practitioner of, what I'll call contemplative practices, sitting quietly every day in stillness, praying, reading uplifting materials, spiritual works, and so on, practicing gratitude and kindness every day, practicing generosity and volunteering, altruistic compassion. So she that's how she ran our house, and those are kind of the daily practices. We didn't call them practices when I was a kid. It's just part of what we did, stopping and being quiet before we ate, expressing thanks. These are now we call those practices. We call that a gratitude practice. So I grew up with my daily life infused with those, and my mom modeling the way. And my dad was a rocket scientist at NASA, and he really taught us about savoring the moment, seeing the world with openness and curiosity, and savoring moments of wonder. I would travel with him out to New Mexico and stand on the ground as the ground shook and rockets launched, and just have that incredible embodied feeling of awe. So between my dad, inspiring me with moments of wonder and awe, and my mother teaching me daily ways to connect to being present and my heart, I think that was the foreground. But it was later when I was living in San Francisco working at Accenture. I was a leader in the change management practice for a management consulting firm, working with a client, an energy company, that my client introduced me to the word mindfulness, and I had never heard of that. This was 22 years ago, and she taught me what this word means, which is just paying attention to my direct experience in the moment. And she taught me how to train my mind and body to get better at that. She's a close teacher and friend of Thich Nhat Hanh. And so 22 years ago, she gave me a book and started teaching me. And then I started training in the monasteries of Thich Nhat Hanh around the world and bringing my family to those monasteries with me. So for 22 years, I've really been deep in the study and practice of the teachings of mindfulness and how to integrate them in my work and life.
Oh, and what a great influence, my goodness, both with your mother. And he's like the Buddhist priest of Buddhist priests,
I know. Yeah, I'm so grateful that I had that upbringing with my parents, but then also that here I am, type A, hard-charging executive for a global consulting firm, and I'm commuting from San Francisco out to the East Bay in California, working on a major, software implementation across the U.S., a lot of pressure, a lot of deadlines, a lot going on, a lot of challenges. And this client, this lovely engineer introduced me to this idea of mindfulness. So it wasn't in a Buddhist temple. It wasn't on a retreat. It was right in the workplace. And that changed my life. It transformed my ability to be resilient and to deal with whatever chaos is happening around me, whether it's loss, I've lost two brothers, whether it's, a major unexpected blow up at work, whether it's the evening news and the tragedy that comes right into our living rooms, I'm able to access a calm center in the midst of that.
It says a lot, and I'm sorry for your loss, and it really shines a light for people who are going through loss. When you lose a sibling, that's just heartbreaking, and for people that have lost their children,
yeah,
or people that are close to them, or pets, depending, loss is loss.
Loss is so difficult. And, I actually added a chapter in my book. It wasn't in my original book proposal, but I added a chapter on loss. So the book is organized in, home, starting the day, work, play, love, our relationships, our self-love and self-care, and then home, how we can be mindful in the evening. But I added this chapter on loss, Marianne, because I've dealt with that so up close. And I realized that the mindfulness training and practice that I had over the years has really increased my capacity to be with searing grief, just tremendous grief, by allowing it to be like feeling that tsunami of sadness wash over me. I'm just thinking of when I lost my brother. When my brother Johnny died suddenly, I was living in San Francisco. He was in Sausalito, and I was 9 months pregnant with my only child. So this was a really hard time. And I had to, I couldn't stuff down the grief and suppress it and push it away, because the research shows that really exacerbates, that really causes health problems and also emotional problems. We can blurt out and create pain for other people. So I had to learn to be with that, like, okay, here's the sadness. Okay, here's the missing Johnny. And then I had to learn how to shift how I relate to that experience. And that's the heart of mindfulness. We learn how to relate to whatever's happening in our life in ways that are, maybe more effective or more compassion-based. So I could feel that loss and then say, okay, here's that wave again, that tsunami of sadness I feel in my body, and it's really connected to the love that my brother and I shared. So I started to transform this grief feeling from grief, but also grief mixed with love, which helped me navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Through that. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because a lot of times we can show so much compassion and caring for other people, but when it comes to ourselves, it's like, ooh, it's really difficult to do that.
Marianne, I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the areas that I've been focused on the most in the last year or so, I work with Deloitte and Google and a lot of big companies, and I'm really focused on compassion and self-compassion. And, they bring me in to help them focus and be more productive and increase their performance, but we end up spending the most time talking about compassion. And there's a practice I share with them that, I later get calls and letters, and when I go back to the client site, I hear from them that this practice of self-compassion is the one that they seem to most grab onto and they use. And I can share that with you and your listeners if you like.
Oh, yes, please.
So it comes from the research of Dr. Kristen Neff and Dr. Christopher Gammer, and it involves 3 steps. So you can imagine right now, like if each of us can imagine a really challenging or difficult moment that we've recently had, especially one where we failed or we dropped the ball or we made a mistake or we didn't deliver what we promised, or even where we harmed someone or hurt their feelings. So these are difficult moments that we all have all the time. So the first step is mindfulness, and mindfulness is about awareness, just recognizing, okay, this is a difficult moment. So I even use touch, which is science-based. It releases oxytocin. I'll put my hand on my chest and I'll say, this is a difficult moment. And then step 2 is common humanity, to connect with the fact that we're human and that people all over the world are experiencing this failure or this problem or this medical diagnosis or whatever it might be. And we just say, I'm not alone. A lot of people wreck the car, or a lot of people got this medical diagnosis, or a lot of people dropped the ball and cost the company money. Like, this connection to common humanity really is we see it in the lab. It's calming our whole experience right there. And then the third step is self-kindness, self-compassion. So with the third breath, if you will, I'll just say, it's okay, sweetheart. or, what do you need right now? Or, what can serve you now? What can serve this moment? So mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. That is how we can practice self-compassion wherever we are, no matter what's happening. And it's transformative.
Those are such easy steps for people to follow. And sometimes it probably feels like, ooh, I don't know if I can do it this moment. But you've given such great examples that people can look at and go, you know what? Everyone makes mistakes. I'm not the only person that's made this mistake. I'm not alone.
Right. And, I think when we make mistakes or drop the ball or let ourselves down or fail, it's so normal. And we're shifting how we relate to that. Like, we're human. This happens. And the research shows that self-compassion actually helps us increase our motivation to grow and develop. It's like a superpower for human development and adult development. We grow more when we're kind to ourselves. And the researchers think that it actually, we know that we're going to be kind to ourselves. We're not going to beat ourselves up. We're not going to stab ourselves with that internal cattle prod, as the ABC anchor Dan Harris calls it. We're going to be kind to ourselves. And then we have motivation to grow. We can say, well, what can I learn from this? How can I do this differently next time? But the first thing I need to do, it's almost like putting the oxygen mask on myself. And I do that with self-compassion practice. I meet myself with kindness in the moment. And then I can act skillfully.
And then be able to move beyond that. It's so easy to see why people are calling your book like the how-to guide for practicing mindfulness, because it really does bring in all these components where people can look at the different issues when it comes to, especially mindfulness for ourselves, how they can break that down and really be kinder to themselves.
Yeah, and I was so just really moved and honored with those early reviews that were coming in, because some of these folks that reviewed the book, like Dan Siegel and Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach, some of these, veterans in mindfulness for the last 40 years, they helped me see that the book is useful for people that are brand new to mindfulness, as well as people that have been longtime practitioners. And I think what makes it useful is that it's not organized around concepts or principles. Mm-hmm. It's actually organized around everyday situations and challenges that we face in the lives we lead right now. So, from how we wake up in the morning and take a shower and sip our morning coffee and work out and commute, to those moments at work that we all have where we need to focus during overwhelm or have a difficult conversation or connect to our priorities. And then, things we do in our free time. So those are the times that we can really cultivate and deepen mindfulness. We don't have to I go to monasteries and go to mindfulness retreats, but a lot of people say, you know what, I don't have time for that. I need to learn how to practice mindfulness in the day that I have right now. So that's really the point of the book, which was really the genius of National Geographic. That was their concept, was to create a book for the layperson, the everyday professional who's juggling it all and wants to know, it's heard about mindfulness, but they don't know really what it is and what exactly would I be doing if I was being mindful. So that was their idea, and I was, really grateful when they chose me to write it.
Well, and kudos to you. I mean, National Geographic, and for our listeners that don't know this, they published your book. I mean, how great is that? I mean, it's kind of like out the gate, there you go. Yeah, and it's so funny. Some people say, why did National Geographic do a book on mindfulness? And it's interesting because, we've known that brand since we were little. Some of us have seen the magazine stacked up with the yellow border. And they've always been curious about, the frontiers of science and what we're learning. And so they realized that,
not only do we explore the external geography of the world, but we're interested in the internal geography, like the internal landscape, and what's happening in the brain and body and nervous system when we're in moments of stress and under pressure, and what's happening in the brain and the body when we're flourishing, when we're feeling strong and confident and connected and loved, and when we feel like we belong. So the book contains both sides of that. It's the positive psychology and the science behind it and how to grow it, as well as what to do when we are in what Dan Goleman calls an amygdala hijack, when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze moment.
Mm-hmm. And you're so right. I mean, there's so much science behind how that really affects our body and stress and what it's doing to us, that developing a mindfulness practice just makes sense.
Yeah, and and what I really appreciate too is there is a lot of science about, what's going on in the body when we're stressed. And, we release adrenaline, release cortisol, and we activate this stress response, which has some real downsides to our health. And, we get irritable and we get impatient and our vision narrows. We can't, brainstorm new possibilities and see creative ideas when we're in that contracted, tight way of being. But what I'm also really appreciating is the growth of the positive psychology field, which is looking at the science of flourishing. And so that's another area that I really focus on and weave into the book is how can we use our minds to deliberately cultivate optimism? How can I build in routines and practices in the day that I have right now which strengthen my ability to see moments of wonder, moments of awe, and to activate and generate gratitude. So, both sides are so interesting to me. It's the hard stuff, the stress, and then the good stuff, the good juicy stuff that fuels me and creates a life of meaning and happiness. So that's why I have the word joy in the subtitle, because it's not just about calming during stress, it's about amplifying joy.
Well, and on that note, I know in your book you talk about how to strengthen a positive outlook. So why is that important, and what are some tips for our listeners that they can start doing that today?
Yeah, I love the work on that, and I've been fortunate enough to study with Richard Davidson. He's at the Center for Healthy Minds, and to really use that research coming out of that group at the University of Wisconsin. And what we know now is that we can cultivate a positive way of seeing, but it begins with, guess what, mindfulness. So mindfulness is yeah, of course it's going to go back to that. Mindfulness is awareness. Mindfulness is just helping me be aware of my thoughts and emotions and how I'm interpreting, a situation. What's the narrative in my head when I'm getting a text from my boss that says, meet me in the office at 3, or when I'm, I apply for a job and I don't get it. How do I make sense of that? And when we cultivate a positive outlook, the first thing we do is start to look at what are my patterns what's my explanatory style? What are my patterns for how I interpret, moments in my everyday? Some of us interpret moments kind of glass half empty, and we have a mindset that's called a fixed mindset. Carol Dweck at Harvard made that really popular, where I kind of personalize things like, I'm just no good at math, or, I'm always late, or, I'll never turn things in on time. We kind of have a permanent fixed view of ourselves. And people with a growth mindset see that they apply this principle of mindfulness of impermanence, that things are changing and growing, and so am I. So I might not be good with numbers today, but I can apply myself and learn and be good with numbers tomorrow. Or I might be, turning things in a day late today, but I can work on it and get things done on time tomorrow. So a growth mindset is one of the elements of a positive outlook. The other thing we can learn to do is to reframe situations and look for possible upsides. So if I apply for a job and I don't get it, can I stop and say, wow, well, what's some of the benefit that I can derive from not having to start that job next Monday? I can spend more time with my kids, or I can take that vacation that I've been putting off before I start my next job. Or I can, look for an opportunity that might be a better fit. So reframing situations and looking for benefits is another way to grow a positive outlook.
Yeah, we'll be able to do that. And I love how you kind of just break it down so that people can really understand how, regardless where they are in their path, like how they can apply that to their mindfulness path today.
Yeah, and, I think the key is that you can cultivate mindfulness. You can grow your mindfulness skills, like going to the mental gym, by dedicating some time, in the mornings, or some of my clients do this at work during the day. They might say, I'm going to sit and follow my breath, the inhale and the exhale, which is a core mindfulness practice called mindful breathing. They might do that at work for 10 minutes during the day, or take a mindful walk, which is really bringing my attention to actually, my foot hitting the floor, or my feet walking on the ground. So I can do formal mindfulness practices, or they're really meditations that strengthen my skills in being mindful. And I can also integrate mindfulness in my day by doing what I already do, but doing it with this awakeness, this alertness, with my attention in the present. So if I'm going to cook dinner, instead of watching the evening news with one eye and, talking with my sister on speakerphone and chatting with my daughter and, multitasking, I can actually cook and notice, the aroma of the garlic as I peel it, and hear the sizzle of the olive oil in the pan, and look at the colors blend together, and really bring my senses and my awareness to whatever it is I'm doing. So those are kind of two fundamental ways to integrate mindfulness into your day. And all of us can do it. It's available to all of us. You don't have to be a monk or a nun or a psychology professor. Any of us can integrate mindfulness into our day.
Well, and talk about monks. Let's talk about this a little bit.
Speaking of monks.
Speaking of monks, by the way, you just happen to, hang out with in my opinion, one of the top monks that there is on this topic. And actually one that I've just appreciated for years. So I'm delighted to hear that you spent time studying with Thich Nhat Hanh. So what were some of the things, because as you, kind of got onto the mindfulness path from work, did you ever kind of look back and go, gosh, some of these things I used to do with my mom and the monk, this is starting to all kind of come full circle?
I love that question, Marianne, because I grew up in a childhood and an experience that I look back on and can see what I learned and the impact that made. But when I was at the University of Maryland and studying, I ran far away from all that. And I realize now that's just a developmental stage that many kids do, but I ran from it. I said, I'm not about organized religion. I'm not about that. But then I've integrated all of that, and I realize it really, there's so many universal truths and universal principles and common practices that Thich Nhat Hanh and Anne Cameron, my mother, share. And I learned from those. And some of those, one of those is that happiness and joy are available to us in every moment. So Thich Nhat Hanh teaches that we can water the seeds of happiness, that we've got seeds of despair and negativity in us. He calls them in our consciousness and our store consciousness, and we've got seeds of happiness and joy. And my mom showed me, she modeled the way on how to do that, and Thich Nhat Hanh taught me that, gave me the language and the practice to just stop and create a little bit of space using the breath, calming the mind and body, and asking, what can I be happy about right now? What can I be joyful about right now? And I really invite you and your listeners to practice that tonight. We're beginning the spring season. I love spring. March 21st is my birthday and my sister's, and we're 8 years apart. So, see, my mom was very magical. and spring is it's a wonderful time to practice that. No matter what's going on, what can I be joyful about right now? What are the seeds of happiness that I can water right now? So that's one of them. That's one of the things I've learned from both of them.
Well, and how beautiful is that? That you kind of look back and listen and go, "Gosh, okay, what a little bit of development that I can take with me throughout my lifetime and continues to bloom." You initially called it a seed, and I think that's a great analogy for it because it really is. It feels like blooms in your life.
I do love that. I remember I was living in San Francisco, and I moved to Hanover, Germany, which is northern Germany, and this was back when my daughter was a year and a half old, and it was very dark there, and we would go for days and days and days without any sun, and I didn't speak German yet. I do now, and I was a VP at Blue Shield in San Francisco, and had a wonderful job in leadership development. And then I moved. I had no job, couldn't speak the language. There was no sun, and I was really feeling pretty down when I first got to Germany. All my friends were across the world, and I joined the International Women's Association, and the motto was "Bloom where you're planted." And I think that has a lot of these connections to Thich Nhat Hanh, that wherever we are, whatever situation we're in, we can bloom. We can water the seeds of goodness, of gratitude, appreciation, of compassion, and service. So we can look at where we can serve. So there I was with my daughter in diapers, and I volunteered to lead the mom and baby group. So, we can access service, and then I made lifelong friends, and I still have them, and I started to bloom where I was planted. But the idea here is to bring mindfulness, bring awareness to the situation we're in, and see how we can look for the seeds of joy, and then reframe, find a new story, a new narrative to describe the context, and then take skillful action. Look for ways that we can take action that can amplify, the good, that can amplify the positive.
Well, and with your extensive, because gosh, you've got such great experience, not just in mindfulness, but also in the business world. So when you're doing this kind of consulting, like we talked about earlier with these Fortune 500 companies and what have you, what is kind of some of the reoccurring thing that you see that people come to you for? I know we've talked about one issue where people come and talk about that inner critic.
Yes.
What are some of the things?
That's a big one.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it's alive and well, it's kind of like, oh, no, I can't listen to that. But you must see some kind of reoccurring things that come up that people come and ask you help for. Yeah,
thank you. There are a number of patterns that I really see with the men and women that I work with. I work with teams in these companies, and I also do one-on-one coaching. And one of them that we see often, and you wouldn't believe the people that have this. People at top of their game, high achievers, incredible resumes at, Fortune 50 companies, and they wrestle with what's called the imposter syndrome, where they feel like, they look around and everyone around them has these incredible degrees and, patents and everything else, and they feel like, oh my gosh, one of these days I'm going to be found out. I'm just not enough. I just don't have what it takes to cut it here. Where meanwhile, that's not true. And it's just a story. It's an internal dialogue. So it's related to the inner critic, but it's just a voice in their head that is limiting their ability to be confident and powerful and find their voice. so I work with executives to see that, to see what the limiting beliefs are, what are the things that hold them back, and we work to free them and to let those go and see that they're not true. You know, I bring in the work of Byron Katie and Tara Brach to say, you know, what are the stories I'm telling myself? Can I let them go? I'm not fighting them. I'm not fighting the inner critic. I'm not beating up the, imposter. I'm more just befriending my mind. And I'm like, all right, there's that it's like greatest hits, One of my teachers, Jack Kornfield, calls it like we all have our top 10 playlist. And you might have your top 3 hits, Marianne, and I have my top 3 hits. But I help leaders identify what their top 3 hits are, and then just see that and recognize that thought and go, oh, there you are. Okay, well, I know that's not true. I do have what it takes. And then I teach them a 3-step centering practice, which is embodied, where they stand up and do this embodied centering practice. So they get into their bodies, they ground themselves with their feet, they raise themselves up into their height, expand their shoulders with their width, and they connect to their depth, all the experience they bring to the moment. And that's kind of hitting the reset button. And then they can let that ruminating, spinning thought pattern go, and then say, you know what, I've got what it takes. And that's really a superpower, that ability to hit that reset button and recenter yourself in your body allows you to then go into the next meeting or make the next call or negotiate the next contract or give that difficult feedback to a direct report from a place of a centered, like calm center, and a center that is compassionate to ourselves and others.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the themes.
Yeah, and when you look at the workplace, because a lot of times people just don't, at least in my experience, I learned that people have more of a difficult time of communicating than most would think. And so when we're working in corporate environments, there tends to be a little bit more aggression that needs to be shown because they just are trying to figure it out. They don't know, like how to communicate well, So it's when you come from a place like that, it must really change the dynamics of everything.
I really appreciate that you brought up communication. That's one of the areas that has been my specialty when I was at Accenture, and now I'm really looking at conscious communication. So how can we bring mindfulness as a skill, being aware, to be more conscious as leaders in the words we're using and the tone of voice we have in our embodied presence, because we communicate nonverbally, the numbers, the statistics are anywhere from 70 to 90% that our communication is more nonverbal than verbal. So how can we look at all the ways we're communicating and be more intentional with that? So I do a lot of coaching and training in corporate America and in business schools on how to be more intentional. So what is the language I'm using? And I was in a really cool podcast studio a couple days ago here in Washington, D.C., with a speechwriter for Clinton and a speechwriter for Bush. So we were talking about how can we bring more conscious communication to the civil discourse that we're experiencing here in the U.S. And I think that, whether it's at the dinner table and people are trying to talk about politics, or whether it's in the boardroom or the conference room or meeting room and people are trying to have productive, engaging, and fruitful conversation, communication is really a foundational skill.
Well, and I know in your book you talk about it being a superpower as well.
Yes. I mean, it really is. It really is. And one of the skills that we teach, I'm a senior teacher with the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, originally developed at Google. And so I teach around the world with that group. And one of the things that we always teach with Search Inside Yourself and also with Purpose Blue, my company, is mindful listening. And I have to tell you, Marianne, you say you're going to spend a half an hour on mindful listening, and people think, are you kidding me? That, I learned that in kindergarten, but mindful listening is so challenging. And when we talk about that, we invite people to work in pairs and to listen to the other person. So I hope all of your listeners can try this at home tonight or at work on tomorrow, is that we listen without an agenda. We allow the other person to speak without interrupting, finishing their sentences, chiming in, sharing a story that is almost like their story but a little bit different, but turns the attention back to me. So we bring mindfulness and self-awareness into the process of listening, and we allow the other person just to talk. And it's incredible what happens in the room when we start experimenting with that. It's really fun.
I think people really feel like they're being heard probably for the first time when that happens.
Yeah, and, when we debrief that, and I ask people, what was your experience? What was it like as a speaker? What was it like as a listener? They say, as a speaker, it was incredible to feel like I didn't have to rush. I knew you were going to give us 2 minutes, and I could really be thoughtful and go a little deeper, and I felt so attended to. Thich Nhat Hanh says the biggest gift that we can give another person is our attention. So we can attend to someone by listening. And then listeners say, oh my gosh, I felt so free. I felt this amazing, liberty, this liberation, not to have to work hard to think about my next point while the other person's talking, because as soon as there's a gap in what they say, I'm going to rush in and fill it. So both people felt the transformation when we practice mindful listening.
Yeah, they really feel like, gosh, it just shifts the energy, and you feel heard. You feel like you're giving that gift to that person, being able to hear what they're saying, and at the same time really be that active participant in a conversation instead of talking at somebody or, like how you're saying, just trying to get your, what I got to say in edgewise. Let's get that in,
Yeah. That's a great summary of the experience. And, as I was listening to you, I was thinking also, as you described that, and I thought, what? She's really describing the recipe or the formula for connection. And we're craving connection, and we can go through the whole day, rushing to the finish line, from meeting to meeting and call to call and email to email, but we never really feel that true connection because we're bouncing back and forth, or we're almost like in a pinball machine. And when we even have one mindful conversation in a day, if we just shoot for that, we have guaranteed one experience of real human connection. And that fuels us. Connection, it's like going to the gas station and filling up my tank when I have real connection.
Well, it's interesting. There have been a lot of reports recently that talk about loneliness and people that feel lonely. And I think some of the best ways of moving beyond that is obviously picking up your book, which is going to be out next week, which we love, The Mindful Day, but also to, reach out to people. If you're feeling lonely, reach out to somebody that is probably lonely too, and make that connection, and that takes care of it for both of you.
I'm really glad you brought up loneliness for a number of reasons. One, you asked me earlier, what are some of the common themes that I see with the leaders I work with and the companies I work with? And we talked about inner critic and imposter syndrome. Another one is loneliness and isolation. And often the higher up people go in an organization, the lonelier and more isolated they feel. Because people don't, speak the truth around them. Everything's filtered. People are busy, so we can get isolated and lonely at work. But then the other thing going on that is true for me personally, it's a pattern that I have, is that I have this pattern where I feel lonely. So with mindfulness and self-awareness, I've discovered that over time, that it's just a pattern that I have. I'm not, if you looked at the evidence, if you looked at the facts, I'm not living, a lonely life. I'm busy, I'm teaching, I was with my girlfriends last night for dinner, but it just is a feeling that will come over me. So this is one near and dear to my heart. I love that you brought that up. And I've had to use my mindfulness practice to recognize. It's like I'm on the balcony and I'm looking at the stage and I can see my life as I'm in a little movie, and I'll recognize, oh, loneliness is here. Oh, here's the lonely feeling again. And I'll say, all right, there you are. And I meet that with kindness. And then I can ask myself, is it true? Are you really all alone? And then I can say, well, I could just call my sister right now. I could walk down to the dog park with Max, my golden retriever. Oh, I've got a meeting coming up in 2 hours. Or, I'm going to meet my neighbors and friends for dinner on Saturday. And I can start to deliberately bring my attention to all the evidence, if you will, that I'm not lonely. But without mindfulness, before I knew how to do that, I would just be inside of that lonely feeling. And I could actually find evidence of, I could find evidence the other way, right? My brain is good at that. Mm-hmm. And then it would well, you really are lonely. Your really good friend lives in San Francisco and the other one's in Hanover, Germany. See? I could find evidence and think deeper. So I think loneliness is a big thing, and we do live more isolated than we used to, but we can use the skills of mindfulness and compassion and attention to kind of embrace the loneliness with kindness and then to move through it.
Well, I've got to tell you, Laurie, it's easy to see why National Geographic picked you to write this book. And I'm so delighted that we've been able to spend this time together, because it's easy for me to be able just to talk with you about all of this. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about where they can pre-order the book?
Oh, thank you, Marianne. And I appreciate your words, because I am passionate about this. You can probably tell. I'm passionate about mindfulness. And, I teach from elementary schools to business schools to companies, because I just know it's really transformed my life, and I want to bring it out there. So I really want to invite your listeners to join me to continue this exploration in my mindfulness community at purposeblue.com. And sign up for my newsletter, and I'm recording meditations that I'll be sharing with my community. So please join me there and order the Mindful Day. I would love that. It's on Amazon right now. You can pre-order it, and it will be out in your hands on March 27th or soon thereafter. So I'd love for listeners to do that as well.
Well, I love this book so much, because I've obviously got the e-version of it, that I placed my order.
Oh, good.
The actual physical book. I'm old school. I like to hold my books and dog-ear the pages and all that good stuff. So I've got mine that will be coming on the way. But, Laurie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, you're so welcome, and I really appreciate our conversation and meeting you this way. So I hope you have a mindful evening and a mindful spring.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Laurie. I hope you have a fabulous mindful evening and spring as well. Well, again, you can pick up Laurie's book. It's going to be coming out soon. I, of course, have ordered my copy. Make sure to order yours at purposeblue.com. And make sure to follow her on social media. She's got some great information, and you want to stay connected with her. I know I do. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.